Personal Finance Consumer Protection. In this video, I'm going to explain what personal finance consumer protection exists for you when you're using a financial service provider. Firstly, let's take a look at what we mean by consumer regulation. Well, these are the laws and the different organisations that are responsible for protecting consumers from being treated unfairly by financial institutions. They tend to look after the interests of the consumer. So what protection exists? Well, you have the Financial Conduct Authority, or the FCA. You have the Financial Service Compensation Scheme, the FSCA. You have the Financial Ombudsmen Service, or the FOS. And you have the Consumer Credit legislation. And all those elements all feed in to give you, the consumer, protection against financial institutions. So the FCA, or the Financial Conduct Authority, is an independent organisation. The FCA regulates the actions of financial service providers. They give the permission to allow people to actually trade and operate. So if you don't have the permission from the FCA, you can't be a financial service provider. They also try to regulate the providers, ensuring they're going to be acting in the interests of consumers. And they actually have the power to enforce non-compliance. So, for example, if an FCA approved provider is not deemed to be acting in the interests of the consumer, then the FCA could fine them, for example, or even remove their license, which means they can no longer trade and operate as a financial service provider. This authority has serious power, and obviously regulators do fear the FCA if they get involved. However, they tend to only get involved if they deem that there's a serious breach taken place. So not in individual circumstances normally, but on a mass. So if something's happened to consumers en masse. Another regulator is the Financial Ombudsman Service, or the FOS. Now, the Ombudsman is a government-approved organisation, and it's really important to stress that the Ombudsman only deals with disputes between consumers and providers, and this is the last resort for any dispute that you have with a financial institution. So you can only seek to see these once you've actually tried to resolve the dispute with the financial organisation already. The Ombudsman will always try and focus on the interest of the consumer, and actually has the power to make legally binding judgments, and that could be to fine providers or enforce them to provide compensation to the customer. But it is really important to stress that you can't just go to the Ombudsman if you've got a complaint. You have to make your complaint first to the financial institution, and if you're then not happy, you then have the choice to refer it to the Ombudsman, who then will make a ruling decision on both parts. Now, there is another service and another scheme that you probably see used quite a lot, and that's the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, or the FSCS. And you may see that lots of accounts claim to be FSCS approved or regulated. Now, that is basically a government-backed scheme. And what they offer is they offer the ability to pay compensation to the consumer if the provider of the financial service is not able to do so. In the case of bank accounts, they offer a guarantee of £85,000 of money in an account is safe in the event of a provider going bankrupt. Now, that's £85,000 per financial provider. So, for example, if you had two accounts with Barclays, you'd only be covered for £85,000. But if you had one account with Barclays and one account with NatWest, you'd be covered for the times two of that £85,000. And if you had three accounts, it'd be times three. As long as there are different providers, you are covered up to £85,000 from losing that money if the provider was to go bankrupt. Now, the FSCS does impose strict rules on providers who wish to offer or take advantage of their protection, so they'll ensure that they are complying with what regulation they set in place, because of course they want to lessen the chance of risk for themselves. But ultimately, it would be the government that have to make that refund of that money if it was to be lost. Now, finally, we have consumer credit legislation. Now, the Consumer Credit Act was originally passed in 1974, and as a result, it's been amended many times, including the Financial Service and Markets Act, and now it is part of EU legislation. However, What we're really talking about here is laws that are passed by government to protect consumers. So this is legal legislation. It's what the government sets out, and it stipulates what financial providers have to do. Now, no provider can operate in the UK if they are not compliant with the law that's in place. In fact, it goes wider than that. You can't operate in the EU because our law at the moment is currently tied to the EU. And as a result of that, if you haven't got the permission to operate within the EU, you can't offer financial services. Now, there is one interesting part of the consumer credit legislation, and that's actually Section 75 of the Consumer Credit Act. Believe it or not, it actually gives you extra additional payment protection if you were to make a purchase on a credit card. So if your purchase is between £100 and £30,000, if, for example, that provider was not to deliver on the goods, you can make a claim against the financial service provider. To give you an example of that, imagine I purchased concert tickets on my credit card that came to £100. I am then protected by Section 75. If, for some reason, those tickets never arrive to me, then you would think that maybe I lose my £100, but not because of Section 75. I didn't buy the tickets. They were bought by the financial service provider using the credit card. It was somebody else's money. And because of Section 75, I get refunded my £100. I don't make a loss of money. That is how Section 75 protects the consumer. Okay, so hopefully you have now got a better understanding of personal finance and the consumer protection that goes around that. If you've got any more questions, don't forget to check out some of my other videos. I've got more detailed information on this area and topic. However, until next time, keep buzzing.